All right. So let's talk about that concept. What is the decolonization of history, and do you see a correlation or a same concept that could be applied to the church, but more importantly into the Black church?
Well, I think, it's one decolonization of history is understanding that we're looking at the world through a colonized lens, a colonized perspective, if you will,
Okay.
right? In the sense of it's taught us things to say like Europe brought the world civility or civilization. And we know that has to be a lie because civility is bringing peace. And you don't bring peace with guns and, raping and pillaging. And so we would really compare um, Europe to their Viking ancestors than we would, in a sense, to the myth that they've put out about the Enlightenment. And so when you begin to look at things like that, and you begin to look at it from the perspective of other cultures, this is what it means to have a decolonized look at history. And so, what was their perspective of who they were,
Right. Okay.
as opposed to the perspective of how they were labeled to be less than human, right? Or less than spiritual, right?
Right.
As you get in and start talking about some of these different cultures, you find that they existed longer, and understood a lot of the different things that we sort of are just now grasping, right?
Right.
The atom, again, was contemplated back in BCE, but this is before we get into science and so on and so forth. The word atom comes from philosophy. And then when you understand that Einstein was simply a philosopher,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're like, well, Einstein was a mathematician. It's like, well, Einstein actually did all his experiments in his head, which required him to go inward, close his eyes, meditate, do all the things that ancient seers and philosophers did and talk
Mm-hmm.
about. And so that decolonized look again begins to look at the world from us as opposed to just simply them.
So, so to summarize, then, is to look at the history not from the standpoint of folks that not to look at it just from one point of view, but to look from it from the context of the people that actually lived the history, not the ones that redefine the history.
Exactly. It's in the sense of teaching people that we're looking at, one of the images I have is it's a video actually of, how you have these different sculptures. When you're looking at it from this one way, it looks like,
Right.
this one thing. And then when you walk around to the other side, now you can see that these things aren't necessarily connected. And now they make up something completely different.
Right.
And that's in a sense of decolonizing history, is that we're looking at it from today as opposed to coming around to the side and now actually being able to see it from this view of, all these different cultures existing, how they existed and why. And now you actually see a more blending of understanding as opposed to this magical popping up of understanding. Again, today they say, they came up with everything. It's like, well, but the Muslims came up
Right.
with algebra and math and whatnot. And then these ancient people, again, demonstrate that they had these solar sites, if you will, that allowed them to tell you when the summer solstice, winter solstice, the
Right.
equinoxes, all that. They begin to actually understand the different stars. And so it's just now giving, civilizations their proper due. And as people of color, if you will, coming from different places, it really, I think, at least the effect that it has within our training is that it gives people a better sense of pride of themselves and who their ancestors were.
Right.
When they can see that they actually did contribute to science and history and all of the stuff that the Enlightenment acts as if they came up with, when really you just woke up and began to read other people's books.
Right. It's interesting because I didn't see the whole thing, but yesterday there was a kind of snippet of a presentation also on PBS about history, but it was talking about Black history. And the part that it talked about was, these were two white guys and a black guy, but these two white guys were bringing out the point that you're making, and they were talking about Woodrow Wilson, that he said he, as a professor at Princeton, wrote these books on history, and then he became president. But the point they made is that he wrote this book about that period of time that included that in reality included a lot of blacks in the politics and things like that. Yet when you read his book, there's no evidence of any of it, although these guys actually showed evidence, historical evidence, that these things existed. And that's one of the things that the black guy said, and he was a pastor. He talked about when people truly understand the contribution that blacks have had in the country, then they begin to truly value who they are. And well, I don't you agree with it or not. but it was very interesting because as it developed, these two black historians was driving the point home, not necessarily intentionally, that black were written out of history purposefully, and in effect is where their effort comes in trying to not rewrite history, although sometimes that's what we do, but more rewrite, make it right, not rewrite, but rewrite history. So just make it right, as opposed to change the meaning or context. And to your point, not try to colonize it from a different view. Okay, not because whether you colonize or not, it doesn't matter, but more bring that history in the right perspective.
Well, it's important to understand, and I think for even people to grasp what that even means, what colonization means, because we get into the Black church and we begin to talk about how it was the only institution allowed for us to really have. Right. Again, it wasn't as if we fought to have, it just was the only thing that we were allowed to have. And when you start looking at the history, then you find out that the Black church is just simply an offshoot of the white church.
Right.
And you find the fundamentalism within the church and the ability for them to reach down and control us, if you will.
Right.
And so I think the Black church has had, in the sense of colonization, right? It was used to colonize us in a way to prolong slavery. And I'll say it was used in a way to also prolong. Well, I think we all feel Jim Crow and whatnot is still of a continuation of slavery.
Right.
The thing I think that the Black church always gives itself a pat on the back and all of the things that it has is done for us, which I don't take anything away from. I never mean in a sense to disrespect it in anything. It's just I don't know if it ever really understands that it's been used as a control mechanism. And the biggest way to really point it out is to say, that they say the civil rights movement really took off, and it was thanks in part, whatever, to the Black church. Well, you got to understand that the Black church, along with white liberals, always said, yes, continue to wait. It wasn't Martin Luther until really Martin Luther King comes along again with this philosophy of nonviolence, again, taught through Hinduism, right? That this was an act of non-action. And so that being introduced and whatnot, now pushed the civil rights movement forward in a way to where, now they had to start killing people because it made them too powerful. And again, love is a very powerful thing. And that was what Martin Luther King was truly demonstrating. And now had these kids demonstrating and so on and so forth, that he loved these people enough to just simply allow them to be who they were without judging them. And that took a lot to love these racist people,
right,
and allow them to be who they were right there for the rest of the world to see. And that allowed them to implode. This is something taught within martial arts, something taught within yoga, something taught within the Eastern philosophies, something taught again within Christianity and within the pages removed from Christianity as well.
well, I don't know about the pages removed, but clearly in Christianity, it talks about not to respond to people in a way that you will pour water over fiery coals, to your point. And it talks about that. It said if you respond to someone's anger through love, you will eventually allow them to implode. they will implode, and you're right. I think that is clearly a scriptural principle. But as we've talked about, that through time, the colonization of the scriptures has allowed people to pervert the teaching to the point, even like you were saying, did the white version of Christianity drove the black version of Christianity to behave in the same way the white version of Christianity behaved? I think that's what you just said.
Well, yeah, I don't necessarily think that there's a white version and a black version. I think that there is the version that was now taught to Africans in a more fundamentalist way, as opposed to spiritual way.
Okay.
And it's in that's been used to control the mind of where people would still call themselves a black church.
Right. And that was something I found interesting as I was listening to the special, when they were just emphasizing the black aspect of the church. And I found it fascinating in that respect, because one of the points that was made was about the Africanization of Christianity. And again, the aspect, I believe what they're implying is the merger, or the I won't say merger, but the blending of the African traditions with the Christian traditions.
I would probably have to see it to even try and fathom what it is that they could be discussing as African traditions within the black church. But as I've participated in the black church, I've not seen anything African about it. But damn sure with all these white people within the book and on the walls and in the stained glass, you may find more Afrocentric churches that are trying to say that, but for the most part, the biggest black churches, give me a break.
But I like the point you made, because I think the Afrocentric church is probably what more they're talking about, because what and again, I know we're playing with words here, but Afrocentric church and black church, to me, it's kind of slightly different. But the concept,
Yes.
what I've seen in the black church is more the integration of African garb. So you see a lot of the preachers and stuff are in traditional, look like African, hats and dress, and I don't know if that's the integration that they're talking about.
That's about as far as I've seen in the Afrocentric churches.
Right, correct. And that's why when you use that term, I like it. I wrote it down because that's basically what more of it is. It's more an Afrocentric church rather than a quote unquote, we call Black church, Black Christian church.
Well, you just call it a church. I mean, it should
we,
just be
you
called a
do,
church.
but we know for a fact today that there's clear definition,
You're right.
out there.
I get that, but again, it's like it's why if people don't know their history,
right?
If people don't have any idea of where these concepts have come from or what concepts have existed in time, then you get stuff like this in a sense of this Black church of where you're simply just painting a broken building. You're not actually repairing the building. You're not repairing the minds. You're not actually building up the people. And this is, I always say, that stuff has their consequences.
Right.
Right. And so again, the Black church is an institution and it exists within neighborhoods and a community and whatever. And I always simply say, how is the community that the Black church serves? And when you look at the community that the Black church serves, it's continually going down. Education has begin to be pulled out of it. And people will say, oh, well, that's not the fault of the Black church. It's like, well, the Black church is a community. The Black church is not like this autonomous thing and whatnot. It's a grouping of the people in the leadership. And so the Black community is a grouping of the people and the leadership. And if you're seeing trying to say that there's a separation, then okay, that makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
And so you see again, and you can see it in Chicago, researching and whatnot, of how the politicians, who believe in white supremacy, pay the leadership of the Black churches to say and do what it is that they want them to say and do.
Yeah. In fact, one of the comments that one of the guys made was about the Black church. He said, and it's kind of in harmony with what you're saying, is that the Black church is continuing reshaping and realigning itself to fit the community. And I found it interesting because as you just said, is it the church role to change its teaching to match the community, or is it to have their teaching drive that community? To your point, is what's the role of the church? Is it we used the term yesterday, I mean last week, is it to inspire to be or indoctrinate to be? Last week we talked about, is it to inspire the community to take on a new way of behaving and acting? And you use Chicago as a perfect example, or as an example. Chicago is a very violent city. Some areas of Chicago are very violent, and in the Black community. So the question then is, why doesn't the Black church provide a guidance and teaching that changes the framework of the community, changes the thinking of the community, to eradicate that type of thinking and behavior, rather than, as you just mentioned, continue to actually getting worse? It continues to get worse even under their continued presence.
While the preachers get richer.
Well, I didn't want to throw that part in, but yeah, you're right.
Well, again, as we talk about consequences and outcomes, right? You see that within the United States, the church is a form of income.
It's a business, yes.
It's damn sure a business.
Yeah.
And so, in the sense of that inspiration, do they inspire more tithing or do they aspire higher spiritual understanding?
Right.
And again, I see that they inspire more tithing, they inspire more of the money gospel
Right.
than they do again of the spirituality. And this does not negate the good that the Black church has done. I always want to come back and say that it has been an important institution for Black people to rely on, if you will. It's just, in a sense that when you understand you've been given a shack to go hide in instead of a bomb shelter,
Mm-hmm.
you have to really start questioning. It's like, damn, you've been given this shack instead of being taught how to build your own spiritual bomb shelter.
Right.
And I say that in the sense of just the Three Little Pigs, is that the big bad wolf can always just come and just blow that shack on over, which is what they do.
Right.
Where if you actually built it for yourself, then it would be built of bricks. It couldn't be blown over. It would stand on its principles. And again, this is what Martin Luther King demonstrated, is that if we just simply, again, stand on our principles and not waver with the times about waiting and so on and so forth, but stand on our principles, then we could be untouched. And again, this is because they'll say, well, we teach to stand on your principles and so on and so forth. I believe that the principles that the Black church espouses come from white supremacy,
Right.
not from Christ supremacy, if you will.
Oh, I like that. White supremacy. I gotta write that one down. I like that one. And although they think it's the same thing, but it's not.
Well, yeah, of course, because they have no idea again
Right.
of.
Right.
I'm being very judgmental here or whatever, but when you can't separate out the teachings of the Christ, the philosophy of the Christ, from the teachings of Constantine and King James
Right.
and these different men that they're following, then you become lost. Right, because again, when you know Christ now, you don't have any fear of anybody else's spirituality and whatever. You're just simply listening for that love within their spirituality, right? I don't go to somebody else's country and say, no. That's not how you say God. You have to say it in this English way, right? Like it's for me to go to another country and listen for what word they use for God. And if I can begin to hear that, oh, wow, there's that Christian teaching. Okay. So there's their spiritual truth. There's their spiritual truth. And now begin to see that this is something higher than just simply words. And most Christians don't. You have to say Jesus. You have to have
And
on the
that's
cross.
wrong. No, I'm joking. And that's wrong. They start out there wrong.
Right?
No,
They're
I
confessing
agree.
the fundamentals and not living the principles.
Right. No, I agree with you, and I think one of the premise of witnesses, and even something that's important to me, and as we talked about, is that your spirituality, your journey has to be based on your discovery of knowledge and truth. It cannot be strictly an emotional journey through nothing. And unfortunately, a lot of Christian journey is about an emotional journey through nothing. So, as you mentioned, the wind comes and blows it away, and it falls apart, and it goes back to one of Jesus' teaching, and he talked about the 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 the, the spiritual word is planted in the fields, and it's planted in people's lives. But some of them, it hits the surface, and the wind just blows it away and it never had any effect. Some of it gets a little impact and people buy into it, but when times get tough, they just kind of abandon it and go back to their own way. And then the one that fundamental, but most important, he says, are those that spend the time, get roots that are deep and strong. And so when the challenges come, they have a strong foundation, so they can survive the pushing, the blowing. They can survive it. They may not stand erect, but they may lean, but they don't fall over because the strength of their conviction is solid and based on knowledge, not just an emotional feeling that, in Christianity that they promote that all you have to do is have this emotional attachment to Christ, and that's all that's necessary. No,
to Jesus.
to Jesus, to Jesus, correct.
And that grounds them in that history, that very, I think like that piece of it, what is so true is that now that's where people stand with their historical understanding of religion, is that's all about your feeling.
Right. Correct.
That's
not about your behavior, not about your action. You can feel like a Christian, but act like a criminal, and it's all good.
Exactly. Again, that's the difference between being indoctrinated and now actually being spiritually awakened. And we're not being spiritually awakened. We're just being indoctrinated and given tools to release our pain, if you will. Right. One of the things within the Black church that you see, which is so different than the white church, is the liveliness of it. Right. Is that, that they get the Holy Ghost and there's this music and whatever. And you got to get, when you have this pent up frustration.
Right.
You need some release.
Dance it off.
You got to go like sing it out, get it. That's what the Holy Ghost is in a sense and whatnot, and again, for people who run and have studied these things in the sense of ecstatic dancing and whatever, this is a tool of what we use to help us expel some of our aggression, right? If we didn't have those tools to expel the aggression, then it would come out in different ways within the society. And so the Black church was the outlet of where you could go and now be expressive, damn sure with a society of people who were taught that you can't be expressive within the society. You have to go and mind your place wherever you are publicly. The Black church was one of the only places you can go and now just yell at the top of your lungs, which, I'm pretty sure within this society, a lot of African Americans wanted to do. And so there's, again, great spiritual acts and things that exist within the Black church. It's just still, it does not give us our story, right? It gives us his story. But it doesn't give us our story, and that's an issue, right? That if I don't have a story for myself, then I wind up following someone else, and if I'm following someone who sees me as less than, then I can never truly live up to be my fullest potential. And that's what decolonizing history is to begin to look to see that, let's stop disrespecting so-called pagan civilizations.
Right.
When they were civil and peaceful at times, it don't mean that they were not human beings. It means that you can go back and look to see what they were doing to allow them to be peaceful and what they were doing that were allowing them not to be peaceful. You don't have to see them as the devil's spawn. And this is how we've been taught to see so-called pagans, which really, again, is we're talking about our own people. Right? The people who weren't pagans were the barbarians who wore crosses. The people who welcomed them were the civilized people who had their arms open. And so again, it's like, That's the colonized version of history, is that it makes us into barbarians, into devil worshiping people who needed to be saved from themselves, when they actually needed to be saved themselves. And so they went to rape and pillage the stuff that we had and are still doing.
Right.
Right? That's not your oil. It's not your gold. It's not your, and you begin to look at history and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. If Solomon's mines existed, place of just plenty of gold, they could have only existed within Africa.
Right.
And we just know this, through geology. You just see it. Is it all replete through history? And he talked about great civilizations like the Mali civilization, who almost bankrupted the Egyptian economy or whatever, because they just gave away so much gold. They just a trek from West Africa to Mecca. The dude gave away so much gold that he almost wrecked their economy. Actually screwed it up for 10 years. Now, people are still wanting to say that, okay, well, Solomon's mine, it would have had to be somewhere in the Middle East. It's like, well, where? It's like there's only one place where gold and diamonds and all of these great things again in this Garden of Eden and whatnot exists. Today and then.
No, I know. No, that's the point. It exists today.
It exists right now.
As you already said, if you take the connection back.
Yes.
It's not like it migrated from the Middle East to Africa.
No. They invented a Middle East.
What's that?
I said they invented a Middle East.
Right. Now, I wrote this down, and I don't know if it's a correct statement, but I wanted to vet it with you based on what you said. So, is decolonization a look at history without the blinders?
Yes. Okay. I would definitely say a look at history without the blinders. A look at history through the last, I'll say 100 years of scientific study.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They've been digging and digging and digging, and you find out like some of the stuff they just discovered in the 1970s. They just came to an understanding of the 1990s. They just dug most of this stuff up, and most of our history books go back to just the 60s.
Right. No, correct.
And that means that those were people who studied stuff from the 40s and 30s.
Correct. No, correct. They're not updating. No, I agree with that, because that was one of the point that was made. Even, and they talked about not just history, but they talked about laws as well. And they were saying that a lot of the laws that were written, they were written at a period of time, Jim Crow and all that, and now they need to be adjusted to reflect current realities, current knowledge. And that's where, as we would imply, is that the powers to be don't want it to be rewritten, because if it's rewritten, then it changes the dynamics. It changes the. Matter of fact, last week we wrote something down I wrote this note down: policy versus power. And the element is that policy gives power. So as you begin to rewrite these laws to ensure equity in policy, then it will lead to equity in power. And that's something that people don't want. Mm-hmm. That desire for equity and power is what prevents the majority, or the moral minority, and I'm not even calling it the moral minority, is what prevents the moral minority from allowing the correction of the existing.
So you mean the immoral minority?
I was using their term.
I get it, but right, that's what colonization does, though.
I know.
Is that it makes us rewrite our understanding in a way to where now we got to do all this mental gymnastics
Right.
in order to truly talk about them, when it's like, let's just call a spade a spade.
Right. No, you're right.
Right. And I think that's them able to pull off their magicianship.
Magician ship or
I'm
shit?
creating words here.
You said
Yes,
magician shit, right? Is that what you said?
I said ship, but shit really fits. It really fits, right? But it's exactly, if you look at Trump and these Trump supporters, that they simply seize on words and avoid meaning,
Right.
avoid action. They just oh wait, no, this one word was used, and now because this one word was used, they extrapolate all this other understanding when they ignore the entire context. Right. And that's the issue, that we fall into that, and now we begin to talk about them in this way, and so when you fall into the trap of saying Black church, right now you have to create hour or so, 2-hour documentary on the positive aspects of it, and not truly look at what that means to have a Black church, to have a separate understanding of God, and now be driven to have this separate understanding of God, and even understanding that Black church, Black community, Black society, Black history is all white history. It's the creation in the 1700s of this white supremacy, and now it's driven the need to now label things white and Black. That was just the 1700s. But before that, there was no legal labeling of whatever. And the reason why this now happens is because they've created their own people that is actually dying, right? White meant Anglo-Saxons. And only Anglo-Saxons were white. It's Germans, English, and whatnot. This is why Hitler took it to that ultimate conclusion, right? The white people were the in the sense of the evolved sense of humanity. Now they were the apex, and so they needed to do away with all of the dirty, unneeded ones of us. Again, eugenics, which did not start in just Germany. It was this worldwide white supremacist understanding. Right? And so we're driven by this colonization, by this white supremacy in ways that we don't understand. And if we don't really talk about it, if we don't pull it out, then we'll continue to believe what they've told us, which again is that, Africa has never contributed anything. It's like, well, you created a Middle East, and they created a Middle East. You've taken Africa and said, well, that's not Africa. That's actually the Middle East. Like, well, no, that's Egypt.
Right. Yeah. Egypt. Right. Right.
Right.
Egypt.
Well, Kemet, because again, Egypt, that wasn't what those people called it. What those people called it was the land of the Blacks. That could be Black soil. That could be Black people. Either way, Kemet was land of the Black.
Right.
It was, and all of these people, again, what we know historically now, because we've been able to dig it up and find it and whatever, they all came from Africa. You can go back 10,000 years and see them putting up the understandings of the of Horus, first worshiping of Horus. They like created these little drawings and whatever of this falcon-headed, individual, if you will, which is the sun god. It's a personification of the sun. And you say, well, what's the importance of that? It's like, well, if you were into farming and animal husbandry and so on and so forth, you needed to know when there was going to be winter, when there was going to be summer, and so the worshiping or study of the sun is central to ancient civilizations. It's central. And so you see, you know, within Europe, they had Stonehenge.
Right.
It's this circular thing or whatever, you know, that was what, 2,500. Within Africa, they have this place called Nabta Playa, 7,500 BCE, right? Stonehenge, 2,500. This is when, you know, white folks begin to start understanding the sun. 7,500 BC is what they find in this place called Nabta Playa, which is just around Sudan. And then they find the pottery from that civilization and whatnot spread all across the Sahara and throughout Africa.
Right.
And so now the establishment of Kemet being an African civilization is undoubted. But yet that's not what we're taught. We're taught that the Arabs who invaded 636 BC, that those are the people who actually founded Egypt. It's like, no, those are Arabs. You can, you know, trace them and people back. They can, you know, they speak Islam. They speak the Arabs, not the people who founded and built the pyramids and so on and so forth.
Right. Right.
But people not knowing this, for me, it disconnects them from the fact that we are all capable of greatness. And without it, you know, again, this lie within the 1700s of these, you know, of eugenics and the superiority of these certain people gets to live on. And live on in the images and whatnot of how they create the society. You know, a man from the Middle East is white, blonde, with blue eyes. Right? Again, you created a race of people, white. You created a region of land, the Middle East. It ain't East. It ain't the middle. That's, again, just the truth of it. But this is what they'll try and indoctrinate us into. And if, for me, just pulling out simple facts like that and whatever makes people stop and begin to think.
No, I agree with you. I think one of the things that's been important to me from a spiritual standpoint is the journey into knowledge, the journey into gaining a true understanding of my faith, but not just my faith in a vacuum, but also other faiths and understanding that. Because I think, as you said, as we build knowledge, gain more and more knowledge, we learn what to accept and what to reject. And I think that's kind of one of the things that you're alluding to here, is that today we have been indoctrinated and taught to accept a certain set of, and I'll use the term loosely, a certain set of facts. And then over time, we have discovered additional facts, but now we're trying to make both of them truth rather than rejecting some of them as not true. And I think that's where sometimes we struggle, because we try to make sense out of nonsense, because it's what allows us to continue to believe, or to continue to live in our misunderstanding, as you would say, the term you use, that we continue to live in our misunderstanding. And we can only do that if we accept both of these things as being truth. And even today, we have a term for it in our society called alternative facts. Okay, we've actually created a term that allows us to accept both of these things, although honestly we know that it's not true, but we are able to have them coexist by labeling them in a way that makes it acceptable.
I got to question that we.
Well, society.
I
I,
know. I'm
I,
just.
I know. I understand the reason behind your
Well,
question.
you make an interesting you make an interesting point in the sense in the importance of knowledge, in the importance of self-discovery,
Yeah.
right? In the importance of like what you said, which I would really say that for me, there has been that importance of taking that journey into the self, into understanding that self, and the importance of that is discovering that myself is in almost two parts, if you will. You know, there's this duality that exists. There's that spiritual self, and then there's that ego self that exists.
Mhm.
And that journey into that, it takes a true deep dive in spiritual and philosophical study of one's being. That's knowledge, right? That's what knowledge gives. And a lot of societies have taught the need to have that knowledge in order to be renewed, to grow.
Right.
So in and so in a sense of what some societies have used to grow, to shed your old self, right? They've used symbols for something like that. And the symbol that some societies have used from ancient times was a snake. They would use the snake and whatnot because the snake would always shed its skin. And so the snake winds up being a symbol of this renewing of that self. And so if when the snake comes along and offers up an apple, the tree of knowledge, now you begin to see these ancient motifs that were used by these people in a sense who were talking about this very same thing of using knowledge to be reborn, to be renewed, and not just being stuck in your old way.
You know, I years ago I had a talk, and it was about that transformation process. But the example or the illustration that I use and I like is the one of a caterpillar. And if you look at it, a caterpillar starts in its life in a cocoon as a caterpillar. But as it evolves through life, it becomes a butterfly. So in effect, that's the transformative aspect of that Christian behavior attitude. Because as you said, one of the things with us as humans is sometimes we shed the skin, but we keep the heart. Okay. And what I mean is we have this appearance, or this, as we said earlier, we have this aspect of we have emotionally we're a Christian, but when we look at our true behavior, we're not a Christian. So, but when you look at a butterfly, okay, and you see that butterfly, you see a different image. Man, when you look at a caterpillar, you don't see it as a butterfly. But when you look at a butterfly, you don't see it as a caterpillar. But in effect, it's that transformative aspect. So when you're a Christian, as I was talking to my sister yesterday, when you are a Christian, one of the scriptures says that you are to transform yourself. So when someone tell you, I'm a Christian, but that's what they would say, that's my personality. That's who I am. Well, if that's what your argument is, then you're not a Christian, because you're holding on to that misunderstanding. You're holding on to your ego as opposed to your spiritual side. You know, because that ego sometimes entrench us into not changing. Because that ego is who we believe
We are.
we are, but more important, what makes us successful, because we don't understand that aspect of what true, that true success is. So we hold on to this misunderstanding, and again, it goes back to that lack of knowledge.
Can you become a butterfly and fall back into misunderstanding?
Yes, yes, and you know
But
what?
you can't do the transformation of caterpillar to butterfly again.
No, correct. You won't. Yeah, correct. You won't become a. And I'll use it this way. You won't become a caterpillar, but could you lose your ability to fly? Could you lose your colors? You know, as you would see, and I'll use that as a strength. You would see a butterfly, and most of kids, when they see a butterfly, they're fascinated by the colors and the wings, and oh, it's beautiful. And when you look at as you would say, can I see that Christian beauty? Do I see it glowing? Do I see it? Then you could have those that individual that lose the color, lose the luster, and you can also see that.
But what happens when you make knowledge bad?
You become an ugly butterfly. I don't know. What's the reason? What's the underlying premise of the question? Because
The underlying premise of the question is that knowledge is that we're having, I think, this great discussion on the importance of knowledge.
Mhm.
This great discussion on the importance of shedding one's old self,
Right,
which is something that has to be done over and over and over and over again.
correct.
It's
Right.
not something that
A
just
growth.
gets
It's a growth process.
a continuous
Right.
growth process.
Continuous transformation of the process. Correct.
Right. It's not just this
Oh,
metamorphosis.
correct.
Right. And so there's this distinction of what we're talking about here, what in the sense of a caterpillar or butterfly is a metamorphosis to where a shedding of your skin, a shedding of oneself, one's old self, as this ongoing and continuing thing, is this blessing, if you will.
Mhm.
Right, because this is how we get rid of those things that we've been holding on to.
Correct.
We shed them, we let them go.
Correct.
And so the premise of what I'm saying is that again is the importance of knowledge and the difference between civilizations or cultures that don't see it as a fall, but see it as a grow. And so as we're taught in a fundamentalist sense, again, from a Black church standpoint, that's where I always come from, is that this is a part of the fall of seeking out knowledge as opposed to just accepting what you've been told. Right? That that disobedience comes from us in the sense of now we're actually driven to have knowledge. There's something in me that's constantly pushed to question since I was a baby. So one thing I can always remember is that I was asking why and what, and my people saying, "Shut the hell up, boy! Stop asking all those damn questions." But I was driven to knowledge,
Right.
but yet in the culture I was indoctrinated into, I was told that that was wrong. That my seeking of this knowledge, of this understanding of myself and where I was and whatnot, was disobedience. And that I was just simply to take what I had been told and accepted, and this is all I was going to be.
Right. One of the things that you said that I find it interesting is that they're right. It's disobedience to man, but it's actually obedience to God. Because God wants us to ask the why. He wants us to gain the understanding of the why. But the aspect that you said, as to culturally, we have been indoctrinated not to ask why, but to accept is. So as you said, we're told that's the way it is. That's the way it always been. Well, why can't we talk about changing it? Well, we're not going to have that dialogue. And I think in there, for me, it's the difference between what the true God wants and what we've led to believe from human society.
And shit, the bigger question for me is shit, what is it? You're saying what is? It's like, okay, well, what is it? Explain to me what it is. If you can't explain to me simply what it is, then
Then it isn't.
and that's the truth.
Right.
That's the truth.
Right.
If I have no understanding of it, then it does not exist for me. This again goes to my point about everyone having their own perspectives.
Right. No, you made a great point in the early part of what you said. No. No, the beautiful thing of what you said is that if I don't have an understanding, then for me, it doesn't exist, or more important, I don't know how to properly apply it in my existence. I don't know how to make it fit within what I do. So to your point, then I begin to create my own understanding. I begin to define it in a way that suits me and works for me. And I think that's a powerful point, because not that we clearly
or the institution.
What?
I said, or the institution. You said if you don't understand it, then you begin to try and define it in a way that suits you. And I said, well, or also you begin to discover ways that suits the institution.
No, correct. Well, the matter of fact, it's interesting. If you define ways that suit the institution, then in effect you are accepting their premise. So we, as you mentioned, we have this struggle, and for each one of us, it's important that we come to understand the why. Now, the why of the institution could make sense, and I'll use the aspect of laws. Does it make sense to have a speed limit? Yes, because if we didn't have a speed limit or guidance in terms of driving down the freeway, we could have chaos. Can you imagine some people driving 100 miles an hour, some people driving 30, some people driving 20 on the freeway? It could create havoc.
No.
Okay, why not?
No.
I disagree with you. Why do you think it won't?
Because there's something called the Autobahn. And you talked about two different things. You talked about two different things. You talked about the speed limit, and then you talked about road laws.
Well,
and so in the sense of just speed, right, is that there's the Autobahn. You're
right.
allowed to go as fast as you want. And you'll actually get tickets in a sense of where if you're going too slow in the wrong lanes. Now you could go again, be in the further lanes and so on. And so yes, there's ways to be whatever, but you're talking about rules of the road.
But and that's and to your point, that's what I to frame it better that way. Rules governing driving, because just like you said, the same thing. Rules governing driving. We have certain speed limits in communities as opposed to on the freeway. Let's say I've been on the Autobahn. I've been on the Autobahn in the left lane, and I've been on the Autobahn on the right lane. And yes, it's scary. but as you said, it exists, and it's able to exist because of the laws that governs that roadway.
So the agreements between people, which are what laws are. And so does the institution need to exist, or does the agreement between the people need to exist? Well, it's the agreement between the people that needs to exist, as opposed to the institution that tries to just lock in those set agreements. And the reason why I'm making this distinction is because it's what our experiment is about here in America, is that it can't be for the importance of the institution. It has to be for the importance of the agreement of the people, because things change. And now that we're no longer on horse and buggies, or now that we're no longer in cars that do a max of 60 miles an hour, or so, now these laws or these agreements between us need to change. They need to grow. They need to shed their old selves, if you will, just as kind of what we discussed earlier of how, they made laws during the time of Jim Crow. And so we need to re-examine these laws. And so the problem that we have is that we make it about the institution and not the people.
But can it be both? Because how do you enforce the agreement between the people without the institution?
But the people, again, are the institution.
Should be.
The agreement that they come up with is just simply the enforcement mechanism of the agreement. The institution, in the sense of, if you're saying with the police force,
What?
are you saying the judicial system? Like what's the institution?
Well, okay, that's the point right here. Let's frame it this way. The people come up with a certain guidelines that we both agree to.
Mm-hmm.
Yet one of us or several of us decided we're not going to comply.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we ensure compliance or manage compliance, if you want to say that way, or enforce compliance? I'm not quite sure what the term is. So how do we get those people that just want to rebel? How do we penalize them for their rebellion? Where's the consequence? How do you impose the consequence for their disobedience without the institution?
So again, we're defining the institution as
the enforcement mechanism, whatever it is.
The police.
It could. Yeah. Matter of fact, one of the things that blew me away earlier this week is when I heard in LA they said they want to defund the police
Mm-hmm.
and give the money to Black students. When I heard it phrased like that, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. But then when I heard a little more, gained some little knowledge, it says, well, they want to defund the part of the police that's allocated to schools. Apparently, there is actually a police force that is funded and allocated to schools.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to redirect that fund into using it differently to enhance the value and the education of the school rather than the policing of the school.
Mm-hmm.
So the point there is, it's about transforming the institution from one of policing or oppressing to one of enhancing and educating. Because as they were saying, if something happened in the school, you don't need people running in with guns. You just need people with the ability to diffuse it and to bring it under control. And the money that's spent with these police could be better spent, allocated into the educating of the students rather than the protecting of the students. Now, I understood it perfectly after I gained additional insight, after I begin to listen beyond the headline. But when you listen to the headline, whoa, because number one, I can imagine all of the white people saying, wait a minute, that don't make sense, but it makes perfect sense.
It right, but it doesn't make sense to people because all they see and all they care about is the institution.
Right.
Not what the institution supposedly stands for, what they're supposed to be doing, and this is what I guess I'm trying to make this distinction, is that we've put it all and made it about the institution and not the function of that institution.
Right.
Not the function of what it's supposed to be doing for the people. And instead of now getting to the why this institution exists, which is the people, we're just simply defending the institution, whether it be the police force, whether it be the church, whether it be, whatever. It becomes about the institution and we forget about its principles and its purpose.
But you made a great point, because we see that, and it's clear evidence today in the animosity or the animus that exists within the federal government today, the Congress and the Senate and the president. You can see it. It's all about their component of it. It's all about preserving the integrity of Congress. It's about the Senate. It's about the presidency. It's not about the people. And this morning they were arguing. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just like, it's not even that. Like, this is so disgusting. It's not even about the principles of the Senate or the Congress. It's about the principles of their party.
Well, I didn't say it was even principle. I was just saying the institution because because just like you said, the Senate, the Republican participants in the Senate don't care about the Senate. They care about their power and influence over the body. So they're willing to sacrifice anything to gain. They're willing to sacrifice policy to gain power. And to your point, it's got to the point where, valid point, we're not even arguing about the institution. We're actually fighting about our view, our perspective, our reality, our truth about what that institution is all about. And it's really, as we mentioned, a scary thing, because people have abandoned what they call morality. They've navigated into that area of that immoral behavior that they justify through morality. You know, they try to use, we are standing up to our morals by acting immorally. How does that even?
Well, they will say, you know, well, they're acting against the Philistines.
Well, you know, in reality, there are times, and matter of fact, I'm writing, I'm putting together a factual, a fact-based I'm put together. I'm collecting some information. I'm building some information to provide you an answer on your question of why did Jehovah direct the Jews to destroy the Philistines?
Well,
and that's different. Now we're not going to go down there right now. I'm working on it.
It's not a question.
It is a question.
It's not. It's not a question. It is for me. You know. We get into this discussion. I get into it with Christians, of course, as you know, in the sense of, well, demonstrate hypocrisy within the Bible. And so this is not a question for me. This is a demonstration of
what? Of hypocrisy?
of the hypocrisy that exists within the Bible, that I'm just simply pointing out, of how people hop around it and use these instances that are clearly cultural, people driven. They have no true philosophical point, right? It's like the laws of the Jews. Now, there's a reason that they had those laws for that time and that moment, but philosophy is something that's universal. It goes on and on and on and on. It's not something that is pinpointed in just some certain time. It's a philosophical point that can be used throughout time. And so here's the difference between spiritual understandings and texts and things that I read, as opposed to ego-driven things that I read. The inability for people to be able to distinguish this within a man-made object is what's so interesting to me. And so I simply point out this contradiction in terms of love demanding death.
Okay, I'm going to again, I'm working on it. I'm not going to get into it right now, but I'm using the concept that you and you help me understand the concept of duality and coexisting.
Hmm?
So we'll talk about that some more as I develop this, because I understand what you're saying. I don't see it as hypocrisy, because initially when I as I process this, I understand exactly where you're coming from. But as I've been digging into it and looking beyond just the surface, I begin to gain a different perspective that I'm going to share with you in one of our upcoming discussions. Because again, I know when I come to you, I need to come with facts. I need to come with stuff. I can't come with this little. Matter of fact, it was interesting. I was reading in my research. I was reading something, and it was one of those Christians, where someone asked the same question, about that killing, and one of the Christian people that wrote it said, "Well, we can't question God. God is just that. We can't question it." And I'm like, that has got to be the stupidest answer I've ever heard. But that's why people, when you hear someone say something like that, then it becomes a point where they have not even taken the time to truly get an understanding of why, how could it even make sense in with a God that they're worshiping. So I'm working on it.
So imagine being a child
Mm-hmm.
of logic,
Right.
and continually getting that answer over and over and over again, and going,
Right.
and again, you know now, of course, that I'm 50. I've been asking this question for not asking it, but actually putting it out there now is just a.
Well, I am. You have slapped me a couple of times. And I am in the process of going to be slapping you back with love, though. I ain't gonna slap you like you slap me. I'm gonna give you. I'm gonna.
It's for me to just say, can we look a little deeper?
Right.
Can we actually dig into it a little bit deeper? Like, again, my digging into the fall, to that the Adam and Eve story and whatnot. It's for me to make sense of it as opposed to throw it away.
I agree.
Right. It's nothing more as I ask these questions, and I'm always given, we shouldn't question God.
I agree, and that's not true. The scripture says keep on asking. That's what it says. It don't say don't ask. It says keep on asking.
And as I ask, and as I'm given answers that make logical sense to me, again, instead of seeing it as a negative, as something to blame Eve over, something to demonize a creature over, can we look at it from a philosophical aspect? And can we look at it from the philosophical aspect of other cultures of that time who talked about these same things, right? Down in Africa, and now understand these motifs a little bit differently. And as you make that same point about knowledge, about shedding one's old self, now we begin to look at these symbols again of a snake. Why would you discuss a snake, use a snake within your folklore, right? Like, these things now make credible sense again for those who are digging deeper. Now, I don't think, again, from our discussions and things that we have studied and looked at things for a longer time in a deeper sense, and always know that it has to come back, in a sense, for me, to ground it back in love. It can't just be something that exists and be not in that love.
Right.
And so looking at that story from a point of love, a point of acceptance, a point of way to be able to better myself, as opposed to as a consequence on why I'm lesser than, if you will, in the sense that that's kind of how I feel by the story of the fall. That now that we dared to ask questions and have knowledge of ourselves, we've fallen, as opposed to just, grown.
Right.
And
No,
if it's something talking about infinity, something that's for all time, right? Of what for me a spiritual scripture would always be discussing. It would be something that speaks to me in this moment. Then it makes more sense to look at it from that philosophical aspect than it does to look at it from that historical aspect.
no, and I agree. And I think one of the things that our discussions and our relationship has had over time is, number one, as you said, I can be a witness to the fact that when information is provided to you in a way that makes sense, logical sense, that you have indeed accepted and worked through it and continue to evolve, and that your evolution is not a momentary thing. Your growth is a continuous growth, and you continue in that process of growing, and that is something that you have helped me to reinforce. It's something I've always done, but you've helped me reinforce it, because my journey into the place I'm at did not come from a simple acceptance of what I was told. It came out of a lot of efforts, a lot of whys, a lot of questioning, a lot of personal digging into beyond. And like I was saying, even the statement that you made about the fall and things like that it's pushed me to say, how does this make sense within the context of a God of love? How does it make sense in the context of a God of purpose? How does it make sense in that aspect of, as you would say, infinity, a continuum of what God's purpose is? And that's the foundation of what I'm building my understanding of. Because as you said, as I research what people are saying, as a Christian, I reject what they said, because I know it's not the viewpoint that Christ or Jehovah wants us to have. He's not telling us, don't question me, I know what I'm doing. My understanding of the Christ and Jehovah is, you can question me, and I'm going to work with you and explain to you what and the why. I'm going to help you gain and understand the why. Sometimes understanding the why, I can't do it right away, because it has to come with additional background information. Mm-hmm. See, a lot of time people just want the answer, and they don't want the background information. Just like we were saying earlier, we accept a form of Black history that's been told to us, but when we start to peel the underlying information, realize, wait a minute, there's no alignment. What you've told me is half or a third, or as a matter of fact, what you've told me doesn't even align with what the underlying information is. And I think that's the important thing, in that, as you talked about, that journey we have to make, that we have to go down, build that foundation, gain that knowledge, and then once we understand the why ourselves, then we are able to then, better share it, but more important, it becomes entrenched in and fortify what we do believe. And I think that's one of the things that in our discussions and as continue to, for me, to remind me that, as we talked about, that my spiritual transformation is continuous. It's not a lot of Christians say, all you gotta do is believe, and this minute you're not a Christian, this minute you're Christian, and once you become a Christian, that's it. You can never not be a Christian. It's like, wait a minute, that's not the way God said it. That's not the way it is. But a lot of us are indoctrinated to believe that to be a fact, that we can, with a simple couple of words in an emotional moment, we can be transformed into this perfect human that
or a dip in water.
Correct. Matter of fact, one of the things that we talk about as witnesses is that once you get baptized, it's not the end. It's actually a beginning of a continued part of your journey. It's a benchmark in the process, but it's interesting as a witness. I got to go in a minute because I got to go get dressed. I didn't dress. So when you started to say this look like laundry clothes, it is. So I need a few extra minutes today to get out of the laundry clothes. But one of the things that as a witness, and we let people know, is that moment of baptism is that moment where you say to Jehovah and to Christ, I'm going to put in the effort. I'm going to do the work in living a life that aligns with your teaching. Understanding that it's a continuous process, because it's not like I have all the information I need. I have all the information I need to make the choice. But as I go through life, as I learn more, as I continue to evolve, I have to keep changing. I have to keep adjusting. I have to keep reflecting that love. And sometimes that love, that moment where the opportunity for me to show love, I want to frame it this way. I tell my brothers and sisters this. There's three types of ministry that we as witnesses or individuals have to be engaged in. One of them is personal ministry. That is our personal development. And that's one of the things that in our conversation, it's been fortified through our conversation and relationship. And I tell people, and in fact, I was telling a young man yesterday, I said, one of the things that you taught me was, don't come to my door and tell me what Jehovah can do for me. Let me see what he's done for you. Let me see it through your action. And that has been a fundamental building block for me. And I share that with people because it's true. If I don't believe in the ministry, then I can't share it with you. I can't inspire you to believe in it. So that's one of those understandings that I think has been very powerful and valuable to me. We have to do our work to build ourselves up in that ministry and that truth in order to effectively then be engaged in the public ministry, sharing it with others. And then the third level of ministry, which I think is very, very important, is that internal ministry. That is that dialogue with our brothers and sisters, helping them to understand that their growth is continuous, helping them to understand that our life, and my boss put it that way. She said that she called Jehovah's Witnesses religion a lifestyle religion. And I like that. I like that because it affects a true Christian should be a lifestyle religion. It should be reflected in your lifestyle. And I do believe as witnesses, that's what we're taught. You're not a Christian on Sunday. You're not a Christian when it's convenient. You should be a Christian all the time, and people should be able to see it in you all of the time. You said it. You use the term, and we use the term. I want to see the love. Okay, I want to see the love. I want to hear the love. I want to. So that's what a Christian lifestyle is. I can always see it. Now there may be. A brother said in an example the other day. He said that he's a baptized brother. He's been baptized for a long time. And he was driving down the street one time on the freeway, and somebody dropped a rock on his car, in his windshield. It's one of those incidents. He thought he was going to die. He pulled over and he looked back and he saw the people that threw it waving and laughing. And he said at that moment, he said, at that moment, I can't tell you guys how I was feeling because it wasn't Christian. But then he said his wife helped him to come back. He called the police and he did all the Christian things that he needed to do. But it's in that aspect that we're talking about, is that your spirituality, your relationship with Christ or with Jehovah through Christ should be reflected in your life on a daily basis. As we would say, in every moment, in every interaction, look for the love, look for the way to share the love, look to engage from an aspect of love. And that's the I'm going to say the perspective that we all as Christians, as Jehovah's Witnesses, have to make sure. And that's why I talk about that third aspect. And I talk to a lot of the younger brothers and sisters about that, because that's what's going to make you effective in your ministry. It's not going to be having the knowledge and knowing, like you said, scaring people into, we don't believe in hell, but I'll just use the term, scaring people into the hell or Satan running the world. But that's all factual and good, but that's not what's important in the ministry. The important in the ministry is, as you stated, I don't know, many years ago, is what has applying it in your life done for you? How has it made you better? How has it made you a better person? Let me understand that. And then I can make the choice for myself. Do I want to be that kind of person? Do I want to accept that way of thinking and behavior? Or do I want to continue in my own journey and my own way? And I think that's been a very powerful aspect as of my growth, of my spiritual growth, and in our relationship. And one of the things that I heard someone said the other day, but we say it too, and that's where I gain traction to know that we're the right track, because I hear other people stealing it. But but this person said something that we talk a lot about, is that the most important thing for all of us are relationships and how we value those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a simple concept. We talk about it, but it's so powerful, because if we value the relationship, then we try to deal with it from a standpoint of love.
Mm-hmm.
Even though that love may have a duality in that now I have to provide some justice to you. I have to really tell you what you need to hear. Not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. I need to tell you that you're not acting from a standpoint of love. Mm-hmm. I need to let you know that what has happened to you is a function of your choice and your disobedience. It's not a question of somebody doing it to you. and that's beautiful.
I'm gonna say this last thing because I know you gotta go.
I gotta go.
But as a business. We have this student who like haven't paid us anything, and we're yogis and whatever, and it's all like love, 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 love. And I was telling my other partners, okay, well, I'm gonna sue them, or I'm gonna send them to collections. And he was like, no, I disagree with that. I disagree with that, and whatever. I was like, well, let's understand what love is, right? And so, just to your point or whatever, it's like I have to love him for who he is, and now give him his consequences. It's me not loving him to where I would not give him his consequences.
Right. You don't let him understand the choice he's making has an impact on others around him, and he is not acting out of love. You see, and that's the beauty there, is that we believe that love is one-sided. No, you're right. That person needs to understand and needs to feel the consequences of their lack of love. And you're right. You got to do it out of love.
All right, man. You got 5 minutes.
All right, my brother. I got to run, but I'm gonna do a silent prayer as I run, because I gotta do it. Okay.
All right.
Love you, my brother.
Love you too.
Be good. Bye bye.